ever seen in its history, made just down the road. And if you'd been here of a night like last night, some 65 years ago, you'd have heard bombers droning overhead, you'd have seen the spotlights, we'd have had the lights on the big wheel off for a start, but you'd have seen spotlights pinpointing out through the night sky, trying to pick out German bombers, heading for Derby, and heading for the industries like that Rolls-Royce factory to try and take out Britain's war effort. So when, for a start, these liberals say, by what right are we so special? Well, for a start, because our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and mothers, they, in towns like Heanor and Eastwood and cities like Derby, up and down this country, went through a blitz and a bombing and a world war to keep the freedom of this country. And that was a war which really and truly should never have involved us in the first place. It shouldn't have been our fight. But once it became, for various reasons, our fight, it was a fight for our freedom, for our traditions, for our freedom of speech, for our properly tolerant society. It was, once it was on us, a just fight. And the people in places like this were all of them part of that fight. And that's why, that's the first reason we've got the right to say, this is our country, ours. And if you come here via a sat-nav, it's taken you through various little villages in the last few miles. And if you looked, or when you go back that way, you look, every single one of those little villages, little tiny villages, has got a war memorial with a few names on it from the Second World War and a whole heartbreaking list from the First World War. And every place around here sent young men, some only 15, lying about their age, off to that war, to fight to keep this country for us, to fight to keep our values and our way of doing things here for us, every single one of them. And when they ask these liberal scum, by what right do we maintain that we can say, no, there are certain people in the world who we simply don't want here? By what right? Because none of their names are on those war memorials. It's only Smith and O'Connor and O'Reilly and Jones and Brown and MacDonald. It's only our names on those war memorials, and that's the right by which we say this is our land and not anybody else's. Well, you might have seen, some of you will know the Colin Orty song on the West Wind album, one which I penned called Brown Sign Land, about how so many of our industries and factories and mines... Sorry, it wasn't a Colin, it was a Frank song, wasn't it? Frank Atack, sorry. It was a Frank song, and very well sung too. You're almost enough on my blind side, I missed you out and you'd have killed me afterwards, I know, I'll buy you a pint. But you'd have seen some brown signs around here. And there's a sign quite near here to Denby Pottery, which is actually still just about functioning, but I expect most of what they sell now, the cheaper end, comes in from Taiwan or whatever. But this place was a pottery area, like Stoke, but smaller. And people think, well, so what? Well, I spent time in Stoke, and I can tell you, there's still men and women in Stoke dying of potter's rot, dying as their lungs collapse, because it's a very dangerous, dirty, dusty, deadly profession being involved in the pottery industry. And also this area, every single little village around here, these are pit villages. There's mine shafts all around the place under here, because generations of people here locally have worked either in the potteries, getting their lungs destroyed by microscopic pot shards, or working down pits. And when they ask us why, by what right is this our land, you can also think that even in a perfectly ordinary place like this, you've got generations of our dead in our graveyards, not from war, but from work. From overwork, from disgusting, dangerous, dirty, exploitative work. The work that paid to make this country great and huge and enormous and powerful and worthwhile and free. And they died to do that, and that's by what right we say this is our country, because our dead built it for us and for our children. That's why it's ours. Or you could go back a little bit further to the English Civil War, where the King raised his standard in 1642 at Nottingham, just down the road. And throughout a large part of the war, this was contested territory, with no enormous battles close by, but small bands of soldiers on both sides, some volunteers, some poor bloody infantry conscripts, going out and fighting and dying in pain and in mud and in appalling conditions over how we were going to run this country and how free we were going to be. And it coloured everything that we now have about our way of looking at the world and our way of running our country and running our affairs and our proper democracy, what's left of it, the one which we'll restore but nobody else. It came in large part from that war. And 1 in 10 of the population of this country died in that war, either directly in the fighting or from the disease and the sieges and the famines. 1/10 of the whole population died in a civil war to establish our right to rule ourselves and to control our masters. And that's why we reject the European Union and the trader politicians that handed us over to it, because we don't have a right to control ourselves anymore when 80% of our laws are made in Brussels. Just one tiny example. And a whole civil war wiped out 1/10 of the population of this country for our right to govern ourselves. And they've given it away. They've given it away. And there's been war after war after war like that between the people, even of this country, over various points of principle and who would do what. And all of those things mean that it's our blood has made this country what it is. It's formed its institutions. It's formed its values. It's what's made it such a wonderful place. It's the blood of generations of our ancestors. And that's why, when they ask us, by what right? Because our ancestors fought and died to make this culture and this civilization in our image and not in anybody else's. That's why it's our country. I'll go back a little bit further still. There's a castle, shattered remnants of a castle at Codner just up the road. And that castle was built by a local baron who was given the right to build it by Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, the great crusader monarch of England. And he gave the right to Earl Grey to build that castle, and you can still see the ruins there today. And it's very fashionable now in BBC circles and Tory party circles and established church circles to run around apologising for what Richard I did and for his crusades and for Western aggression against the poor innocent Muslims. And they never for 1 minute stopped to understand or think or explain that every single one of those crusades was a defensive crusade by the West, by Europe, against an aggressive imperialistic monster from the Middle East that was a menace to us then and is a menace to us now. And this party does not apologise for Richard I. OK, he was a Norman bastard, but we'll forgive him that. We don't apologise for Richard I or for the Crusades that took place there then, or for saying that we're now in a position through the whole of the Western world where, before this generation is out, we will, unless things are turned round rapidly, have to fight a new crusade, not to secure the right of Christian pilgrims to visit the Holy Land, but for the right of people to worship as Christians in our land. So no apologies. And again, if it hadn't been for a number of generations of soldiers and military leaders, not just in Richard I's time, but later and before, through the various nations of Europe, then we wouldn't even have a Western, Christian or secular democratic society and civilization to protect. So no apologies. And again, when they say, by what right do we maintain that we want a democratic, free, Christian society where women are treated as equals, where animals are treated well? By what right do we demand the right to exclude the Muslim world? Because generations of our forefathers fought to do so, and by doing so they made this a better country and they made this world a better world. That's by what right, we say. We want to keep it that way. And finally, in recent history, a couple of miles west of here, there's a Roman road.